Israel once again shows its ruthless brutality in Gaza. This time, the outrage does not only come from the international community but also from within Israel's own military ranks. The controversy erupted after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed what he called deep regret over the deadly assault on Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza. The attack left at least 20 people dead, including 5 journalists and 4 medical staff, innocent individuals who should never have been targets in any war. This so-called apology from Netanyahu, however, sparked a storm of anger inside the very army that carried out the operation. Reports from Channel 14 revealed that members of the elite Sayeret Javadi unit, directly involved in the hospital strike, are furious at Netanyahu. They perceive his statement as nothing less than a betrayal against soldiers risking their lives on the ground. These soldiers claim that the attack was fully authorized, planned, and coordinated by senior command. For them, Netanyahu's sudden remorse is nothing but a political maneuver designed to deflect mounting international criticism while throwing his own forces under the bus. This incident exposes the cracks and contradictions within Israel's war machine. On one side, the military executes brutal operations, striking civilian infrastructure and blatantly disregarding international humanitarian law. On the other, its political leadership scrambles to manage global outrage, attempting to soften its image with words of regret that only fuel distrust internally. The Nasser hospital massacre is not an isolated case. Since October 2023, Israel has escalated its attacks across Gaza, repeatedly targeting civilian areas, refugee camps, and now hospitals. Claiming that Hamas uses such sites for surveillance or military purposes, Israel justifies actions that the world sees as war crimes. The fury inside Israel's own military highlights a deepening fracture. Soldiers feel sacrificed for the sake of political calculations, while civilians in Gaza pay the ultimate price with their lives. Netanyahu's words of regret have not brought peace. They have brought chaos, anger, and intensified condemnation from every corner. The uproar surrounding the Nasser hospital massacre has now become more than just an international scandal. It has transformed into a domestic crisis within Israel itself. Soldiers from the Sayeret Javadi unit are openly expressing their fury at Prime Minister Netanyahu's remarks. They believe the Prime Minister deliberately shifted blame onto them to shield himself from global backlash. According to testimonies leaked to Israeli media, the soldiers insist that every step of the hospital strike was cleared by the highest chain of command. "We executed orders. We acted exactly as instructed," one of them reportedly stated, demanding that the responsibility not fall on their shoulders alone. This internal revolt sheds light on a fundamental problem. Israel's leadership is trapped between its aggressive military campaigns and the crumbling facade of international legitimacy. The government cannot deny the bloodshed, but it also cannot afford to fully own the decisions without risking sanctions or further isolation. Netanyahu's calculated words of regret are therefore nothing but an attempt to appease foreign powers, particularly Washington and European allies, while sacrificing the morale and loyalty of his own forces. At the same time, human rights organizations and international observers are ramping up their criticism. The World Health Organization has condemned the strike as a violation of international law, while the United Nations has demanded an immediate investigation. For many countries, the attack on a hospital represents a clear war crime that cannot be justified by any claim of Hamas presence. Images from the aftermath, smoldering hospital wards, lifeless bodies of medical workers, and bloodied children, have spread rapidly across global media, igniting outrage and fueling calls for accountability. But Netanyahu's gamble is backfiring. Instead of easing pressure, his words have created fractures within the army and deepened suspicion among citizens. Families of soldiers now fear that their sons will be used as scapegoats while political leaders evade justice. Inside Israel, protests are mounting, accusing the Prime Minister of failing both the military and the nation. Meanwhile, Gaza continues to suffer daily bombardments, with each strike eroding Israel's credibility further in the eyes of the world. The fallout from Netanyahu's remarks is now shaking the very foundation of Israel's political establishment. Members of the opposition are seizing this moment to attack the Prime Minister, accusing him of deliberately endangering the army's reputation to protect his fragile government. Former military officials, once loyal to the state narrative, are warning that this blame game could cause an irreversible rift between Israel's political leadership and its armed forces. This is not just a public relations crisis, this is a fracture in the chain of trust, said one retired general in an interview with Hebrew media outlets. Netanyahu, who has long thrived on dividing the Israeli public for his own political survival, now finds himself cornered. His strategy of externalizing blame, whether to Palestinians, international critics, or now his own soldiers, has pushed Israel into a dangerous state of disunity. Analysts note that this tactic may buy him a few more weeks of political breathing room, but at the cost of weakening the very institution that secures Israel's power, its military. Meanwhile, the international community is not fooled. Washington, despite its consistent backing of Israel, is under mounting domestic and international pressure to rein in its ally. Protests are erupting in major U.S. cities, where demonstrators accuse the Biden administration of complicity in war crimes by supplying weapons and vetoing UN resolutions. In Europe, several parliaments are debating whether to suspend arms sales to Israel until accountability is ensured. The isolation is palpable. Inside Gaza, the human cost continues to climb. Every day without accountability means more airstrikes, more funerals, more displacement. For the Palestinian people, Netanyahu's words are not just political maneuvering. They are a cruel reminder that their suffering is being trivialized as part of a power struggle within Israel. Hospitals remain overcrowded with wounded civilians, doctors operate without electricity, and families search the rubble for missing loved ones. The question now is whether Israel's allies will continue shielding its government from consequences, or whether the massacre at Nasser hospital will mark a turning point where the world finally decides that enough is enough. The Israeli government is now scrambling to contain the firestorm. Official spokespeople are attempting to clarify Netanyahu's remarks, insisting that his words were taken out of context. But the damage has already been done. The footage of his statement is circulating across global media, leaving little room for spin. His own words stand as undeniable evidence of a leader who appears more focused on political survival than on accountability for a humanitarian catastrophe. Domestically, the cracks are widening. Families of Israeli soldiers killed in Gaza are publicly demanding an apology. They argue that Netanyahu is dishonoring the sacrifices of their sons and daughters by shifting blame onto the military. These families, often respected voices in Israeli society, are now leading protests outside the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem, carrying placards that read, "Stop sacrificing our children for your politics." The military establishment itself is beginning to push back. Several high-ranking officers, speaking off the record, have expressed frustration that the political leadership is eroding morale. Some warn that if the trust between the army and the government collapses, Israel's ability to wage its ongoing campaign in Gaza will be severely compromised. This internal conflict is being watched closely by observers, who note that Israel's greatest vulnerability has always been political infighting during moments of crisis. On the international stage, the outrage is expanding. Human rights organizations are calling for independent investigations into the Nasser hospital massacre. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are labeling Netanyahu's remarks as attempts to obstruct justice. In Geneva, UN officials are quietly preparing reports that could lead to formal accusations of war crimes, putting Israel's leadership under unprecedented legal scrutiny. And yet, amid all of this, Gaza remains in ruins. The cries of children, the mourning of families, and the desperation of the displaced echo louder than any political scandal. For the people trapped under the rubble of destroyed neighborhoods, Netanyahu's excuses and accusations mean little. What they demand is justice, dignity, and an end to their endless suffering. The anger is no longer confined to statements and reports, it is spilling into the streets. Across major cities in Europe, the Middle East, and North America, protesters are marching in the thousands, demanding accountability for the massacre in Khan Yunis and condemning Israel's attempt to shift blame. In London, demonstrators filled Trafalgar Square with banners reading, "Netanyahu, the world is watching." In Washington, D.C., activists rallied outside the White House, pressuring the U.S. government to reconsider its unwavering support for Israel. From Jakarta to Cape Town, global solidarity with Gaza is gaining unprecedented momentum. This global pressure is starting to fracture Israel's diplomatic shield. Some European Union members are calling for sanctions, while others are threatening to suspend arms sales. In the Arab world, governments are under rising pressure from their citizens to cut ties with Tel Aviv. Even traditional allies of Israel are finding it increasingly difficult to defend a government that appears tone-deaf to humanitarian law and international outrage. Meanwhile, Palestinian voices are growing louder. Survivors of the Nasser hospital attack are sharing their stories with international media. Mothers describing how their children were pulled lifeless from the rubble. Doctors recounting the horror of operating without electricity, clean water, or basic medical supplies. Their testimonies are piercing through the fog of political rhetoric, reminding the world that beyond the statistics and headlines are human beings whose lives have been shattered. At the same time, legal experts are pointing to a possible turning point. For the first time in decades, serious discussions are emerging in The Hague about whether Israel's leadership could face formal charges at the International Criminal Court. While such proceedings are complex and lengthy, the symbolism is powerful. Netanyahu's words may have opened a door that Israel cannot easily close, one that could put its top officials in the same category as other leaders accused of war crimes. What once might have been dismissed as business as usual in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is now escalating into a confrontation between Israel and much of the world. The question is no longer whether the world is watching, but whether the world will act. Inside Israel, Netanyahu's words are also igniting political turmoil. Opposition leaders are seizing on his reckless statement, accusing him of dragging the nation into deeper isolation. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak openly stated that Netanyahu has become a liability, not just for Israel's international standing but for its own security. Even within the ruling coalition, whispers of dissent are growing. Some ministers fear that the Prime Minister's confrontational tone could trigger sanctions that would cripple Israel's economy and military support. On the ground, the military campaign continues with no sign of slowing. Yet reports from Israeli human rights organizations are adding fuel to the fire, revealing disturbing details about operations in Gaza that suggest violations of international law. Testimonies from soldiers themselves, leaked to local press, describe orders to target infrastructure critical for civilian survival. These revelations are shaking the narrative that the government has worked tirelessly to maintain, and they threaten to dismantle Israel's claims of self-defense. The cracks are not just political, they are social. Across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem, ordinary citizens are taking to the streets, not to support the war, but to demand accountability from their leaders. Protesters are holding vigils for Palestinian children killed in the strikes, an unprecedented act of defiance that shows how deeply Netanyahu's policies are dividing Israeli society. Chants of "Not in our name" echo through the streets, signaling a growing refusal to be complicit in what many now call crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, the international media is no longer following Israel's script. Once friendly outlets are questioning official statements, cross-checking with satellite images, eyewitness accounts, and independent NGOs. The global narrative is slipping from Israel's control, and Netanyahu's attempt to project strength is backfiring spectacularly. His words may have been meant to intimidate, but they are instead galvanizing a worldwide movement demanding justice. The storm is no longer on the horizon. It is here, battering Israel from all directions, political, legal, and moral. And Netanyahu, the man who once thrived on projecting authority, now stands exposed, his government teetering under the weight of its own arrogance. Across the globe, the ripple effects of Netanyahu's reckless stance are becoming impossible to ignore. The United Nations is intensifying its pressure, with the Human Rights Council preparing to launch a full-scale investigation into possible war crimes committed in Gaza. Several member states are pushing for a referral to the International Criminal Court, a move that could place Israeli officials, including Netanyahu himself, under international indictment. The Israeli leadership has dismissed these developments as political theater, but legal experts warn that the walls of impunity are closing in faster than ever before. In Europe, the backlash is particularly fierce. Spain, Ireland, and Belgium are calling for an arms embargo on Israel, accusing it of violating fundamental human rights principles. France and Germany, once among Israel's staunchest defenders, are growing uneasy, signaling that their support is not unconditional. Even the United States, Israel's most important ally, is facing unprecedented pressure from lawmakers and the public. Rallies in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles are drawing tens of thousands, demanding that American weapons stop fueling the bloodshed. For the first time in decades, bipartisan voices in Congress are openly questioning the strategic value of an alliance that is increasingly tied to crimes against civilians. In the Middle East, the consequences are even more dangerous. Iran and Hezbollah are using Netanyahu's words as a rallying cry, declaring that Israel's arrogance has revealed its true intentions. Jordan and Egypt, key partners in regional stability, are under pressure from their own citizens to sever ties. The fragile balance of peace is wobbling, and the specter of a broader regional conflict looms larger by the day. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations warn that the situation in Gaza has reached a breaking point. Food, water, and medical supplies are running out. Hospitals are overwhelmed, treating the wounded under candlelight as generators run dry. The world is watching images of starving children and destroyed neighborhoods, and the outrage is growing louder. What Netanyahu hoped would be a display of strength is now painting Israel as a pariah state, isolated and condemned. This is not the image of a secure, powerful nation. It is the portrait of a government standing at the edge of collapse, its legitimacy shattered, its alliances strained, and its moral authority completely eroded. Netanyahu's gamble has set Israel on a collision course with the world, and there may be no way back.